Bilal, there's a range of topics to choose from here, but the one that really caught my eye a little bit earlier on was about Taiwan and the risks that could potentially be posed there. And it really caught my eye today because of the SMIC story and it being placed on the entities list by the United States and the risk that this could potentially pose to China and its desire to get its chip industry up and running. How big a risk is there surrounding the relationship between Beijing and Taiwan, and a risk that the US could get dragged into it in 2021?
Well, I do think this is quite a major risk. You know, the question is what type of risk, whether it will lead to military conflict or something, you know, something like a non-military type conflict. But certainly if you look at the noise that's coming from China, they've certainly escalated their rhetoric towards Taiwan. You know, where President Xi, where he recently visited some of his sort of military sort of generals and talked about how they need to prepare for an attack. There's been more editorials in the Chinese state media about Taiwan being part of China. And recently, even a week or so ago, the Chinese authorized or kind of required almost the Chinese Coast Guard to become more active in imposing Chinese sovereignty. Historically, the Coast Guard's only sort of dealt with fishing issues and so on. So certainly the rhetoric has sort of picked up on that side. You know, meanwhile, as you rightly point out, the whole focus on the chip sector is very, very important because chips are, of course, you know, central to, you know, so many technologies around the world. And China essentially is around 10 years behind where Taiwan, Korea, and the US is. And even the US now is starting to struggle. You know, Intel has struggled with its latest generation of chips, and now they may well partner with the Taiwanese TSMC chip manufacturer. And so there could be a play by China to somehow get access to Taiwan's chip industry, especially if the US does start to tighten its control on what China can do. So I definitely think this is a serious and a major risk for 2021.
That is such a good analysis, and I wonder, you know, the other wild cards, what happens in the U.S. in terms of President Biden. And I'm going to tie two of your gray swans together. One of them is that Democrats get a clean sweep, and that Biden actually unites the United States of America.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what happens in the Georgia runoff in January is going to be so important to the Biden administration. At the moment, if you look at market probabilities and polling, the odds are still in favor of the Republicans, but the polls are narrowing and the betting markets are narrowing. So it does suggest that the race may be much closer than people think. So if he does win the Senate, that gives a lot more leeway to what the administration can do. And in terms of Biden uniting the US, I think there is something to be said about that. You know, at the moment, the rhetoric for the last like 4 or 5 years has been all about polarization, but perhaps we've seen peak polarization under Trump. You know, Biden's a very different character from Trump, or indeed from Obama. He's not the archetypal charismatic, you know, type of president. He's been around for a long time. He's you know, dealt with a sort of a stutter. He's quite popular amongst the white working class. And so in some ways, he has all the right ingredients to unite the country. And there could be certain things like, you know, measures to alleviate student debt and infrastructure program, all of these sorts of things that could change the narrative in the US. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility that we could have hit peak polarization.
I like Alex's idea of tying two grey swans together. It's a nice image. So let's do that again. This time slightly more antagonistically. US yields go negative, and/or central bankers' prayers get answered and inflation surges.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, within the Macro Hive, you know, community, we have massive debates around inflation. So we thought we'd feature two grey swans, which are in some ways diametrically opposed. You know, one written by John Butler, you know, who focuses on the inflation surging. You know, the argument there is there's all these supply chain issues, food prices are going to rise, that will cause inflation in emerging markets, which will then be passed on to developed world. So that's one, you know, and it could really go out of control. That's one potential risk. But the one I wrote, you know, which obviously I'll be a bit biased towards, is US yields going negative, you know, because when I speak to investors and when you read other people's reports, most people are expecting bond yields to go up next year. You know, that's a consensus view, the consensus forecast out there where everybody's talking about, you know, yields going high, inflation risk and so on. But my take is the real grey swan would be if US yields went negative. Nobody's expecting that, you know, yet Spanish yields have gone negative, French yields are negative, German yields are negative, Japanese yields are negative. And so why can't US yields go negative? Typically, on any given year over the last 10 or 15 years, the US yields have corrected lower by an average of 115 basis points. That's a typical kind of correction lower that you've seen in US yields. So if we have something similar occurring, in the first half of next year, say, then that would easily take US yields to below zero. So, and there could be a number of things that could cause that. One could be if the fiscal stimulus optimism passes, it gets priced in. There could be a stock market correction. And so there could be certain scenarios where that could happen. But I haven't really heard anyone talk about this potential risk.
Bilal, we love talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy holidays to you, Bilal Hafeez, Macro Hive CEO and editor. Thanks very much.